In this episode, I share my random thoughts about the glorious theists. I explain how to choose the best magic for your character. I bring extreme weather of the UK into your adventures and provide an insight into how I keep multiple campaign worlds going. Welcome to the Mythras Matters podcast, Season 1, Episode 83, Choosing Magic and Extreme Weather. Hello and welcome to Mythras Matters, a podcast dedicated to the Mythras rule set and all its supplements. As always, I am your host, Inwils, and welcome to July. If I sound a bit croaky, I apologise. I am currently recovering from one of those dreadful summer colds, and it's really early in the morning here, just about 5:30, so I've just got up. So, as well as recovering from a cold, we are also recovering from our second heat wave in the UK. And although we don't have aircon as standard here, well, we call our aircon windows, I've managed to survive 2 heat waves, and I'm looking forward to autumn when we have darker nights, colder weather, and higher fuel bills. I'm going to come back to extreme weathers later in the podcast, but first of all, I want to talk about managing multiple campaign worlds and keeping everything super organized. As a GM, I feel we are always working, and I don't mean working to earn money to pay rent and food bills. I mean working on our campaigns. Even when we are deep in one campaign adventure, our minds are always thinking about the question, what's next? Currently, with our actual play group, we are playing Mythras, and even though my head is still generating interactions and encounters and developing the plot line further, I am thinking about my next campaign we will be playing, which will be Destined. Having a campaign rotation has really helped my creative process because I am not constantly thinking about what we could play next or whether I'm really enjoying this campaign, so let me just create another adventure. The rotation is set up and both myself and the players know this. So therefore, I know when I'm roughly halfway through the second adventure in a campaign world, we've agreed that we'll play 2 adventures, then swap. I need to start thinking about the next campaign world. I'm not sure if this is the same for other GMs or even players, but I always need to spend time going back over the campaign setting for the new game. I need to spend some time reading the articles on the setting and the overviews of each adventure, so I have an idea of what happened when we were last in that campaign world. It also reminds me of the large-scale plot lines I'd put in place. To give you an example, I'm going to refer to our current Mythras game and try not to give any of the plot lines away. I know some of my players listen to this. First, I checked out the overview for the last adventure as the party arrived at Argent Reach. The overview is written and stored in World Anvil, as is the whole adventure, and it gives me details of my thinking for the adventure. I also like to add at the bottom of the article, almost like steps or plot lines, how I need to engage with the plot line as it develops. This often gives me a starting point for my next adventure. The last overview I wrote finished with introducing Argent Reach, changing currency, and developing the Harbingers of Doom plotline. I can't say what it is called, it would give too much away, but enough to say it is a main plotline in the part of the campaign and it is developing nicely. There were also two rather cryptic notes: long spears with wings and test your might. It took me a while to understand what they meant, but eventually I remembered that I wanted to work more on weapon reach in combat and try to use magic more. Don't ask how I knew this or the connection. There is one there, maybe you can spot it. Once I have this as a starting point, I start to think. I'm going to create some content about how I create adventures, but mainly this is 90% perspiration, thinking while working and sheer panic before this first session, and 9% inspiration, and the final 1% sheer luck. As we continue playing the current campaign, I start jotting down ideas and creative snippets in my campaign notebook. At this point, it is real pen and paper stuff, but I must have a specific type of notebook and a specific type of pens and pencils to do this. If you're interested in what I use, you can find everything on my website. This is what I call the frustration phase. I jot down so many ideas and let them simmer, hoping they'll come together in some way, only to find that they usually don't, and I get annoyed with my apparent lack of creativity. I am usually waiting for the bolt from the blue moment when I get a really great idea that ignites my passion and creative power, though it often comes very slowly. Sometimes it doesn't even happen, and I have to do the one thing I hate, postponing a gaming session while I create the adventure. Once the creative spark has been ignited, then it tends to be plain sailing for a while. I detailed the whole adventure in an overview article on World Anvil, then add plot articles with the overview article as their parent. I also number the plot articles so I know that they are in some kind of scene order. Although I have created the whole adventure in bullet points, I tend not to complete it fully. I tell myself that I don't do this because the party might do things differently, but I think I actually don't do it because I don't have the time. And I have to admit that I'm frequently walking home from work on a Friday evening and suddenly think, drat, I haven't written the next part of the adventure, and back into panic mode I go. The other thing I would like to confess is that I am not a great fan of writing in great detail for each scene in the adventure. I tend to think about what I will need most and then focus on writing that. For example, I will write any descriptions that I will want to read aloud in the session and complete tables that will provide information after, say, a computer or streetwise skill. But I don't write out full NPC conversations or even descriptions of every location. For NPCs, I write their names, attitude, information, and important skills, and then I just wing everything else, keeping my fingers crossed that no one notices. World Anvil helps me keep track of NPCs, locations, and even plot lines, so I know that everything I might need will be there somewhere. If I could change anything about my campaign and adventure creation, I think it would be to allocate dedicated time to my worlds to create new elements or adventures. Currently, I feel that I am always fighting fires as sessions approach, and despite many attempts, I'm still at this stage. It would be nice to know that my next adventure is created and ready to play so I could seamlessly move from one campaign to another. I haven't achieved this dedicated time yet, mainly because I can't find the time, and I feel that we are better creating when we feel the urge or if we're fired up to do something rather than saying, oh, it's 7 o'clock on the Friday, please create. I have tried to stream the content creation process, but I tend to focus too much on the chat and interacting rather than creating. This is something I definitely need to develop, so if you have any ideas, then please do let me know. I'm interested in how other GMs continue to create even when things are busy or you are lacking creative inspiration. And players, you're not getting off the hook. How do you prepare for a new campaign or even the next adventure? Do you spend time reading your notes and getting back into character? Or do you just turn up with your drinks and snacks and go for it? Let me know in the comments. I mentioned in the introduction about the heat waves that we have experienced in the UK recently, the hottest temperature in June for several years. I'm not a fan of the sun or heat, so I have been very sweaty and in a constant bad mood for several days. I never complain about the weather when it's cold, wet and windy, so I feel justified in complaining when it's hot. Plus, I can't run when it is hot, so that makes me even more prickly. If you live in the UK or have been here, you will know that we are famous for how unpredictable and extreme our weather can be. Yesterday, we started the day with heavy rainfall and constant rolling thunder. And then by the end of the day, we had 33 degrees of sunshine and no breeze at all. Opening my front door and stepping out was like stepping into an oven. However, the UK's extreme weather conditions inspired me to create something. If you are already subscribed, then thank you. For those who are not, I create a monthly fanzine called Dice and Design. The fanzine is curated and written by me and is completely free to you. I never use AI, and I pay and give credit to the artist whose work appears in the fanzine. The fanzine now has 9 sections, including behind the scenes, NPC spotlight and echoes from the table. I have to say now, because I think I started with 6, and in my madness, I keep adding to it. You can subscribe to the newsletter to receive 1 email a month with the link to the fanzine for download, all completely free. I know I'm stupid, but I've set myself a target of 100 subscribers. So if you're willing, interested, or just want to be helpful, I've put the link to the fanzine in the show notes. Okay, let's go back to extreme weather, especially in the UK, and how this has provided me with some creative inspiration. One of the sections every month is a random table, and for July, I capitalized on the UK's random weather patterns and created a table of extreme weather and its effect for campaign worlds. This got me thinking about weather and whether it should or could affect the gaming sessions. When it is super hot, windy and rainy, I often think how powerful controlling the weather really is. Storm from the X-Men, probably the best of the group, can do so many things just by whitening out her eyes and summoning extreme weathers. And druids share this power, bringing rain to drench the crops or high winds to bid sailing ships bon voyage. But beyond these, what effect does the weather have on the campaign world, and do we ignore it too much to the relief of our players? First up is how the weather adds to the atmosphere or feel of the setting. This is probably my favourite application of weather, when it adds to the description of the location, and from this description, moods and emotions are inferred. Walking into a village where it has rained for several days and it is continuing to rain seems to communicate desperation and depression. People are walking around completely drenched and their feet sloshing through streets that are full of muddy puddles. Even the horses will be hanging their heads as they get constantly beaten by the rain. In stark contrast, think about walking into a village on a spring day when the sun is shining, a light breeze is blowing, and soft clouds dance across the sky. The mood changes so dramatically. In the second scene, people will be smiley, happy, and probably dry. Although if I was in the second scene, I would be grumpy and moaning, most people are positive. This is the most dramatic effect of the weather, I think, and is why, as GMs, we need to use it to add to all our descriptions. The characters' roles might not be affected, but the feel of the location will be apparent. Next up, shelter and clothing. I've never worn full plate mail or even pieces of armour, but I think as well as being extremely heavy, wearing armour would make you warm. Coupled with the various layers of padding and chainmail, I would venture that rather than warm, you would be very hot, especially if you start to move or fight. And if you are the mage in the corner laughing at the sweat-filled metal cans of fighters, I think you would also be very hot in your robes, no matter whether your hood is up or down. What we choose to wear when it's hot and cold does influence how we can operate in these conditions. Even without extreme weather, characters will get fatigued from wearing their chosen garb, but this will only worsen when the weather changes. And although many players might claim that their character grew up in the frozen north, where they used to run naked through the snow and take regular cold baths, it has probably been a while since they were in those conditions, and reacclimatizing will take some time. At this point, I would also point out that if the cold living barbarian does not feel the cold anymore, they will certainly feel the heat. For them, even a warm spring day is probably too hot for them. So how does the weather impact clothing? Do the characters dress appropriately, or are they clad out in gear regardless of the weather? If the latter, then how does that impact on the game? Are players making their own wise decision at this point, or is the GM having to impose suitable dress codes? Shelter is especially important at night or while travelling in extreme weather. High winds and driving rain might mean that the process will be much slower, and the party might decide to take shelter to avoid that randomly striking lightning bolt. I'm always reminded of the Lord of the Rings when they are trying to navigate the Pass of Caradhras. The snow there meant that they had to take shelter to avoid the driving snow and the deadly avalanches. Shelter can be the character's greatest ally when the weather gets extreme, as long as they have food and water to allow them to camp and possibly light a fire. At this point, the players can really lean into role-playing opportunities. How will they dry their clothes? How will their mood change? What are they thinking of? How will they walk? Are they moaning or complaining? I'll let you continue. The list goes on and on. And finally, and rather predictably, we come to the impact on dice rolls. In a recent adventure, you might remember that I took the players to the frozen north of the continent and made them don cold weather clothing. Well, made them is probably not the best way of saying it. I encouraged them to do it to avoid the rather nasty consequences of being exposed to extreme coldness. Because of the bulkiness of the clothing, I said that all skill checks that required physical activity would be 1 grade harder. So standard checks would be hard, formidable, etc. This had a serious impact on the game, especially when they went into combat. I was really shocked by how simply increasing the difficulty by 1 grade could have had such an impact on the game. The party were definitely ready to be out of the clothing and back into their usual attire. But there is more than just the clothing the characters have to wear or not wear in the effects of extreme heat. The environment itself will change. In hot weather, dust will be everywhere, and the party will need to seek shades at all times to avoid dehydration and fatigue. With ice and snow, surfaces become slippery, making skills harder, and driving rain and deafening thunder make even simple communication or spell casting a nightmare. Of course, visibility can also be affected by extreme weather, so perception checks will be harder, including when trying to notice that the creatures who are familiar with the snowy surroundings are hiding with their white fur and stealth skills. With all these effects possible, the weather changing the atmosphere of the game, what the characters will be wearing, the need for shelter, and the impact on skills, extreme weather can really alter the feel of the game. And because of this, anyone who controls the weather would have all these opportunities literally at their fingertips. Suddenly that animist with a storm spirit or the theist who is able to control the weather becomes instantly more powerful and becomes something that will be feared by characters and opponents alike. With no classes in Mythras, everyone has the opportunity to cast spells. This can be quite daunting at character generation or even later on in the game when you decide to add a magical flair to your character. To help new and old players alike, I'm referring to experience rather than age here, I thought I would provide a simple overview of the magic system in Mythras, so helping you to decide which might be the best magic for your character and playing style. Rather than just describing the different types of magic to you, you can read all that in the core rule book. I'm going to present a series of questions that you can ask yourself to help you inform your choice. Think about it as one of those quizzes that you might take in a magazine, and its answer reveals what your favourite animal would be. You get the idea. And don't pretend you've never done one of those quizzes, because I will not believe you. Okay, so question number 1, what type of magic do you want? If you want simple spells that are easy to cast but don't have a great impact, then go for folk magic. These spells always take one turn to cast, and you never need to consider intensity or magnitude. They only require one skill to learn and cast, and although the effects are limited, you can have a lot of fun with them. And some spells like Blade Sharp can be very effective. If you want magic that purely affects your character's prowess, then go the mystic route. These are slightly more complex than folk magic and requires 2 skills to be effective, mysticism and meditation. And all your spells, or really talents, affect you personally. I've talked about how most people think about mystics as monks, but they can also work as bards, death knights, and even dream walkers. But if you want something more impressive and magic that goes beyond augmenting yourself, then you need to consider the next question. Okay, so question 2 is, do you want a familiar magical concept? At this point, it is all about deciding whether you want to go with something familiar or something new and unique to Mythras. If you want a spell system that is familiar to anyone who has played RPGs before, then go with the theist or the previously mentioned mystics and folk magic. Theists are essentially clerics and have a range of spells from the familiar heals to damage spells such as lightning bolt and heart seizure. There are some variation with the casting time of spells, but essentially the intensity and magnitude are set for you, so there are fewer things to learn. Theists do have a devotion pool to cast their miracles. Yes, theists never call them spells, but it is an easy mechanic to learn and implement. You might be saying at this stage that you want to go sorcery if you want a familiar system, but I think sorcery is completely different from the mages and wizards that people might be familiar with from different systems. If you still haven't made up your mind what magic you want to go with, then it's time for question number 3. So question number 3 is all about the origins of the magic. This might seem a strange question to ask, but I think it is the main reason why I never play a theist or cleric. I always want my characters to be the source of the magic. They control the magic and no matter what they do, their magic comes from within them. If you want to have the same feeling about your magic, then your choices are folk magic, mysticism, and sorcery. The latter, you learn spells from grimoires, but you don't need the books to cast the spells. If you want to be more like a channeler or rely on spirits to provide you with the magical effects, then you need to go with theist or an animist. The theists we have already discussed, but remember that their magic or their miracles come from their deities, not from themselves. If they annoy or get disconnected from their deity, then their magic will go. Now, animists are quite unique. They don't really cast spells. They summon spirits to do their bidding, and each spirit has different abilities. Some can attack, others can manipulate elements, including darkness, others heal, and some are just maniacs and will attack anything in sight and eat your soul without giving you a second chance. But if the animist loses their spirits, then they lose their magic, just like the theists. And the final question, how much flexibility do you want with your spell casting? I have to admit, I had several versions of this final question, including how creative do you want to be? Do you want a system with increased challenge? And how much time do you have to learn a new system? But if you want a point-and-click spellcaster, then folk magic, theism, or mysticism should be your choices. If you want something that is more challenging and has more flexibility and possibly even creativity, then sorcery and animus are for you. I've mentioned animism before, so let me briefly say something about sorcery. Before I said that you should not fall into the trap of thinking that these are wizards from other RPG systems. I said that because sorcerers, in my opinion, are not even close to those fire-blasting spellcasters of D&D. As well as their spells being quite unique, for example, their main attack spell is Rack, which can take on the form of anything from lightning bolts to black tendrils. They also have an ability called Shaping. This allows the sorcerer to manipulate their spells to increase a range of aspects of the spells they cast. They can increase the range of the spell, the number of targets it affects, its duration and magnitude, and the pinnacle of sorcery, they can actually cast multiple spells at the same time. Whenever you cast a sorcery spell, you are thinking about what elements of the spell you need to alter, balancing this with the amount of time it takes to cast the spell and the amount of magic it will drain from you. I always see sorcery as a balancing act between cost in time, power, and the result you want. As an indication of the complexity of the spell casting, I always pre-decide the spells I'm going to cast, the amount of magic points they will cost, and the overall casting time when I'm using sorcery in my games. I plan this as the GM. Despite all this complexity, in my opinion, it is probably the most flexible and powerful of all magic systems in Mythras. The power comes from within you, and you have the ability to manipulate that power as much as you want. Something that theists can only dream of doing. Remember, if you would like to contribute to the podcast, then why not drop me an email or message and let me know what you would like to cover. I'm always looking for reviews or interviews or chats with people. So if you are interested, then you can email me at inwils@gmail.com or send me a message on the various forums I frequent. And if you have any questions or topics that you would like us to discuss on the podcast, then let me know. I can always reach out and put together a table of experts to contribute to the discussions. In the previous section, I mentioned that theists gain their magic from their deity. Although this simplifies the system for requesting miracles, it also brings into the campaign world a very important feature: gods, goddesses, divine beings, and how they impact both your campaign world and your theists. The first thing I have to say, as a small but important detail, is that the core rulebook doesn't mention theists casting spells. It talks about requesting miracles. This emphasizes that the power or spell is not coming from the character themselves, but is being channeled through them by the divine power. But if that power is coming from the gods themselves, then what restrictions does the theist have on them to maintain their faith and connection with the divine entity? After creating my sorcery orders, the next aspect of my campaign world that I created were the divine beings. These are all stored on World Anvil for access for both players and viewers of the campaign. I have to admit that I just created themes for each of the entities and then shared them with the players who wanted to be a theist, and then only added the detail for the one that he chose to worship. This saved me a huge amount of time and energy, and I still have both the old and new gods for future use. In addition to this, when a character wanted to play an animist, I added the spirit gods to the campaign, and again, I only developed the one that the player chose. When creating orders for theists, there comes a time when you need to detail what the value, beliefs, and aims are of the group of people worshipping the god or goddesses. This comes from the creation of a religious order that surrounds the divine being, as well as detailing how to progress in the order, which lets the theist know which spells are available to them. The order also specifies the benefits, oaths, restrictions, gifts, superstitions, and even taboos. This is the time that the theist really comes to life, because you start to directly influence the behavior of the character. I always start off simply because at lower levels the order will probably welcome anyone. They are not likely to impose strict taboos on the lower ranks, and by the time the character is rising up the ranks, they will probably be too heavily invested to take a different route. I never liked the old AD&D rule that clerics could not use edge weapons, because I saw that as a blanket rule that was just preventing them being as strong in combat as blade-wielding fighters. I do think it is a good idea to introduce that the gods' view on combat is, though, whether or not they require specific weapons to be wielded and how they act or behave in combat. I know that Bartleby in our campaign carries a staff, but can only use it to defend himself. This allows him to focus on defensive specials and avoids him rushing into combat all the time. I imagine a war deity would have completely the opposite philosophy, possibly even requiring their theist to accompany the soldiers into battle, or even possibly leading the charge, trusting in their divine power that accompanies them to keep them safe and to smite their enemies. One aspect of being a theist that I always think about is how strict their deity actually is. When the theist falters or strays too far from the imposed strict code, what will happen? Initially, I assumed no more miracles would be granted. We use folk magic to represent simple prayers or cantrips, so initially these might remain, but eventually even these might be removed. The theists have a skill called devotion that affects the strength of the miracles they can cast. Maybe when the theist falters or strays from the code, this devotion skill will be lowered, or even maybe the theist might have to make a successful devotion roll before their exhort skill to see if the deity is even listening. Or the devotion roll might have increased difficulties. I would always make it clear to the theist what they have done wrong, usually in dreams or visions, and then I would send tests to see if they could atone for their sins and get back on the true path of righteousness. Of course, the character might never want to return to the deity and might become someone who always rejects religion and becomes a complete cynic. I always remember reading the background of a pre-generated character in an AD&D adventure, which said that the character was once a cleric but abandoned his god to become just a fighter. This somehow appealed to me. Not that he was a fighter, but because the character was so true to his own beliefs that he was willing to sacrifice the use of spells to move away from the doctrine of the deity. Imagine the role-playing opportunity in a situation when casting a heal from his ex-god would have saved someone's life. Does he do it, or does he stay true to his beliefs and in doing so lets the person die? Alternatively, the theist might be lured to another divine being or even the opposing one. Imagine the discussions and arguments that might happen in divine planes when there is an accusation that one god has poached the followers of another. In this situation, the dwellers of the material plane are just pawns for the gods, as they can be manipulated and controlled as the deities seem fit. And that sums up how I often feel about theists. Their power comes from the divine. The gods control, influence, and manipulate their followers, ensuring that things will go the way they want. And if it doesn't, then be warned, because anyone refusing or resisting will feel the wrath of the divine beings. And that is why I would be a sorcerer over a theist any day. And that's it, another episode of Mythras Matters completed. Thank you for listening and checking out all my RPG content. You can find the links to my YouTube channel, digital download shop, and the Dice and Design fanzine in the show notes. Thank you for all your support. And if you are interested in using World Anvil, then there is a link in the show notes. And do use the coupon inwils for 51% off any yearly membership to World Anvil. So until next time, have a great month of gaming, and I will chat to you all again in August. Until then, I hope all your opposed rolls succeed and grant you with a well-deserved special. Thanks for listening, everyone. See ya. Bye. The content of this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license, so please give appropriate credit if you are sharing or copying any part of this podcast. Thank you. If I seem rather quiet in this episode, I do apologise. I am recording this very early in the morning because real life commitments just got in the way of my RPG content. Anyway, it's been shared with you on time, so even if it's a bit quieter and a bit croakier. See you all in August. Have a great time. Bye-bye.